You know how it is sometimes? You just want to grasp the core of a really complex story, get the crucial bits without wading through absolutely
Right,
everything.
you want to feel informed quickly, not completely overwhelmed.
Exactly. And today, we're doing just that, diving deep into a really pivotal moment, the downfall of Saddam Hussein.
And we've got some fascinating source material here, focusing specifically on those later years of his rule. We've touched on his rise before, but this time we're really zeroing in on the key events, the factors that led to his fall.
Yeah, the fall of someone who seemed for a long time pretty much untouchable.
Absolutely.
So, our mission for everyone listening is to really understand those critical points, the missteps, the pressures, the turning points that brought his regime to an end. It's complicated stuff, though. Where do we start?
Well, a logical place, and what many see as the real beginning of the end for his grip on power, was his decision to invade Kuwait back in 1990.
Kuwait, right. Okay, let's unpack that. Saddam's reasoning, as I understand it, was sort of twofold. He believed Kuwait was historically Iraqi territory and that they were hurting Iraq economically with their oil policies.
That's pretty much it, yeah. He framed it as reclaiming what was rightfully Iraq's and correcting these economic wrongs.
Hmm.
But the huge thing here, the massive miscalculation, was how badly he read the international reaction.
So it wasn't just seen as some regional dispute.
Not at all. It was like a red alert for the whole world. Violating sovereignty like that, it triggered almost universal condemnation, a swift, really decisive response. He lost legitimacy on the world stage, fundamentally.
A real line in the sand moment then, and that kicked off the first Gulf War almost immediately, didn't it? The U.S.-led coalition pushing Iraqi forces out pretty quickly.
Incredibly quickly. Militarily, it was a decisive defeat for Iraq. The coalition had superior tech, better coordination, a UN mandate. But, and this is so important, the stated goal then was liberating Kuwait.
Not removing Saddam.
Exactly. So, despite this major military blowback, he actually remained in power in Baghdad.
Okay, so Iraq's defeated militarily, Kuwait's free, but Saddam's still the leader. What happened right after that? What were the consequences for Iraq?
Well, the big consequence was the UN sanctions. The international community imposed these really extensive sanctions.
And these weren't just like weapons embargoes.
Oh no, far broader. They hit almost everything. Food imports, medicine, and critically, Iraq's ability to export oil and make money.
Wow. So the impact on ordinary Iraqi people must have been just devastating.
It was widespread shortages, hunger, disease outbreaks, immense hardship for regular citizens.
Mm.
It's difficult to really capture the scale of the suffering during those years.
Just grinding poverty and lack of basics.
Yes. And what's so stark is the contrast. Well, the population was suffering like this. Saddam. He
Yeah.
kept building these huge, lavish palaces.
Seriously, during the sanctions.
Yes, pouring resources into symbols of his power, running his propaganda machine full tilt, portraying himself as Iraq's defender against the world. Well, people couldn't get medicine. It tells you a lot about his priorities.
His image and control over everything else.
Completely. His survival, his regime survival, above the well-being of the Iraqi people.
So you have these crippling sanctions, immense public suffering, but Saddam manages to hold on for years. What eventually shifted the dynamic towards another invasion?
The big catalyst was 9/11, the terror attacks in 2001, and the start of the U.S. war on terror.
Okay, but let's be really clear here. Saddam Hussein wasn't involved in 9/11, right?
Absolutely vital point. There was no credible link established between Saddam's regime
Yeah.
and the 9/11 attacks. They were separate issues.
So why the focus back on Iraq then? What was the rationale given?
The U.S. administration at the time voiced two main concerns. First, the suspicion, despite UN inspections, that Iraq still possessed weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. And second, allegations that the regime had ties to and supported various terrorist groups, not necessarily al-Qaeda, but others.
Okay, so those suspicions in that post 9/11 atmosphere.
Exactly. In that heightened global security climate, those concerns gained traction and built the political case for intervention. And that led directly to the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq, Gulf War II.
And this time, the stated goal was regime change, to remove Saddam from power.
Yes, explicitly.
And the actual toppling of his government happened relatively fast, I recall. But finding Saddam himself took longer.
That's right. The main military campaign was quite swift. Baghdad fell, the regime collapsed. But Saddam himself vanished for several months, evaded capture.
Kept that myth of invincibility going for a bit longer, maybe.
Perhaps. But then, in December 2003, came the news. He'd been found.
And the circumstances were just Unbelievable, weren't they? Hiding in a hole.
A small underground bunker, yeah.
Yeah.
Often described as a spider hole. The images were stark, disheveled, diminished.
Such a massive contrast to the powerful dictator image he'd cultivated for decades. All those statues and portraits.
It was profound. The leader projected absolute strength found in, well, pretty squalid conditions. Symbolically, it was the total end of that carefully crafted image.
And from capture, the next step was the trial.
Yes, his trial. A hugely significant event, putting a former head of state on trial for crimes committed while in power.
What were the main charges?
War crimes, genocide specifically relating to campaigns against Kurds and other groups within Iraq over the years.
And the verdict.
It came in 2006.
Mm,
Found guilty, the sentence was death.
the death penalty. And the execution followed pretty soon after, didn't it? End of 2006.
December 30th, 2006. He was executed by hanging in Iraq.
And that itself became controversial with that leaked video showing people taunting him.
Yes, that added another layer of debate and, for some, unease around the process. But undeniably, it marked the absolute final end of Saddam Hussein's rule. The world literally watched a dictator meet his end.
So, Saddam is gone. His regime is dismantled. Democracy, or at least attempts at it, are introduced. You'd hope that leads to stability, right? Peace.
Well, that's the tragic irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
The reality was, unfortunately, very different. The years immediately following Saddam's removal were incredibly violent and unstable.
Yeah, it descended into chaos.
A devastating civil war, sectarian violence, the rise of powerful insurgent and terrorist groups, culminating eventually in the emergence of ISIS, which took over large parts of the country.
Which leads to that really difficult, uncomfortable question you sometimes hear people ask.
Exactly. It's a deeply challenging thought to even entertain, but you have to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Was the brutal stability under Saddam's dictatorship, in hindsight, somehow preferable to the absolute chaos, the bloodshed, the rise of ISIS that followed his removal?
It's a horrible question with no good answer. It really makes you confront the complexities of intervention, regime change. The unintended consequences can be enormous.
They certainly can. And Saddam's story, his whole trajectory, really stands as this stark, enduring cautionary tale.
About what happens when power goes unchecked.
Yes, about the dangers of absolute power, the massive consequences of miscalculation on the world stage, like invading Kuwait, and just the deep, lasting scars left by decades of authoritarian rule.
From that invasion decision, which kind of set everything in motion.
All the way through the sanctions, the second invasion, his capture in that bunker, the trial, the execution.
It's just a powerful reminder, I suppose, that no matter how powerful someone seems, nobody is immortal or ultimately above consequences.
Precisely. Eventually, everyone, regardless of the power they wield, faces accountability for their actions, one way or another.